Punching In is supported by a generous grant from the Annie E. Casey Foundation in an effort to expand public awareness and dialogue about families striving to make work pay.
It was told to us that this was the future of Milwaukee. A.O. Smith, Tower Automotive, in this building. I feel like I'm speaking for all of those people who are hurt and continue to be hurt. And I'm not just speaking for those people from A.O. Smith or Tower Automotive, but I want to speak for those people from American Motors, Continental Can, Falk, Schlitz, Miller, Pabst, Allen Bradley, Alex Chalmers, the drop forges, the tanneries, all of those men and women like myself who now, for the most part, are silent, and no one ever told their story.
From 1945 to 1975 was called the golden years of American history, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin was known as the toolbox to the world. American workers experienced an unprecedented amount of prosperity and economic stability. The transition to a global technological economy ended this industrial era, and it knocked out the heart and souls of cities like Milwaukee. And hit hardest was the African American community, thus limiting their chances of punching in. As a young community and political activist, learning why the disparities that I've dealt with in our communities exist in this day and age has been powerful. In the 1930s and 40s, black men and women left their southern roots of a segregated South and traveled north to follow their dreams of getting good jobs. These black men and women came with a shirt on their back and a determination to succeed in their pocket. They came and punched in on first, second, and third shift for 25 to 35 years. They provided for their families a middle-class lifestyle. But the transition to a global, technological economy ended the industrial era and knocked out the heart and soul of cities like Milwaukee, ending that middle-class lifestyle. Without a strategic economic plan to replace thousands of manufacturing jobs, the city of Milwaukee hemorrhaged, creating poverty not seen since the Depression.
We've lost all of our health insurance. After all of that, I think it would be less than proper if I didn't say something about that hurt.
Earl Ingram Jr. worked for A.O. Smith and Tower Automotives, who bought A.O. Smith, for 30 years. When he started, there were about 6,500 employees, of which around 40% were African Americans. Today, former factory workers like Ingram are still questioning what happened.
We thought and believed in our company, believed in the system, believed in America. And now, if you ask those same men who did the same things that I did and who now face a very uncertain future as we go into the later years of our lives, they would all ask the question, why? How can corporations who have stood as long as this one and continue to be prosperous in other parts of the world, as well as other parts of this country, be allowed to do the things that they are doing to the people who helped build them and make them who they are?
American Motors in 1970 employed 4,000 employees. Alice Chalmers in 1970 employed 11,500 employees. One by one, they all fell like dominoes, sold out. The global train hit Milwaukee, and it hit hard.
Bottom started to fall out, I guess, in the early 80s or late 70s, and our communities continued, the working class communities continued to lose ground when it comes to its living standard.
As recently as 1970, African Americans living in Milwaukee had the highest per capita income of African Americans in the country in large cities. And the reason for that is because we had all these great blue collar jobs, all these factories, all these breweries, where people of different racial backgrounds could have jobs where they could support their families. That has dramatically changed since 1970 as we've seen the exodus of many of these blue collar jobs. And the most recent statistics show that there's a high percentage of people of color, both African American and Hispanic, who are living in poverty in this area, in the city of Milwaukee in particular.
The real beginning of the story started when blacks left the farms and cotton fields and traveled to unknown and often hostile northern environments. They found jobs in auto factories, foundries, tanneries, meat packing plants, and the railroads.
Before the Civil War, which began back in 1861, there were probably 100 or so African Americans in Milwaukee, and they lived in all sections of town. Some were in the professions, they owned real estate, they were fairly widely dispersed. The real critical mass came during that Great Migration, the first Great Migration, 1910 to about 1930. And the whole pattern there was the same pattern you saw in Chicago, Cincinnati, Cleveland, St. Louis. It was the movement of rural, agricultural Southerners to urban industrial jobs in the North. The attraction was jobs. Milwaukee was growing, industries were booming here.
Back during the war, there was jobs, there were so many jobs a person could go maybe 5 jobs a day if he really wanted to. But most of the jobs for the blacks were factories, foundries, the lower paying jobs. Now they had skilled labor, they had training, 4-year apprenticeships, but the blacks were really, they didn't accept them. Construction, no, they couldn't join carpenters, bricklayers, that was taboo, they just didn't hire you until much later. The thing that bothers me now about the factories today, during the war, they didn't have the skilled trades. They had the women being electricians and welding, and the factories train them. Now the factories claim there's no skilled laborers, but the factory isn't training them anymore. So naturally, back in the 40s and the 50s, there wasn't that many black people, maybe 5,000, 6,000, other than in the Walnut Street area. We were all confined, maybe from down Village Street.
Mr. Sims is referring to the early Milwaukee black community called Bronzeville. The Bronzeville story is that this is not the first time Milwaukee's black community has been hit economically. The Bronzeville community was a thriving area of the city where blacks lived and ran businesses in the late 18 and early 1900s. This area was located along Walnut Street between 3rd and 12th. The 1950s brought about urban renewal in the building of the North-South Freeway, I-43, which cut right down the middle of Bronzeville. Many jobs and homes were lost. Former Bronzeville resident Frederick Burtz gives us a snapshot of that historical area.
And Walnut Street was kind of like the little business area up and down from 4th Street all the way up to 12th Street.
So there used to be businesses like
all line up here. Now this used to be, the blacks moved into a kind of a Jewish community. The European Jews coming over, working class Jews and Germans used to live in this area. And so a lot of stores were still owned by them, and then blacks began to put stores up themselves. Used to be in this area, used to be across the street, the hardware store, Kelly's. There used to be a bandbox cleaners, used to be on the corner of 8th and Walnut.
Right over
owned
here.
by Afro-American, right. And then there was, when I mentioned to you about Hendrick's drugstore, his brother was also a pharmacist and had a drugstore up around 9th and Walnut. And then around 7th and Walnut, there was the Regal Theater, owned and operated by the Margolis family. But that was a black theater that we used to go to as kids.
How big was the theater?
Well, it was a theater, I guess it's seated about 150, 200 people. And they had
like
little,
right here.
Right in this block here, right there, maybe right in front of the Roosevelt building there, Roosevelt High School, junior high school.
Now,
You said the whole Walnut Strip was like the middle of Bronzeville.
They're like a strip of businesses.
It was like Water Street is now.
Yeah, like you had the old Booker T. Washington YMCA, which is the forerunner of the North Central, North Side YMCA today. It used to be right on the corner of 8th and Walnut.
Okay.
That was the YMCA where the picture in the Black Bronzeville book shows a group of kids standing out in front of that building on Saturday morning. Me and my two brothers were in that picture. This was the first group of people that went to a YMCA camp called Camp Minikani.
Now, most of the people who grew up in the community, did they become business owners in the community of Bronzeville? Like, what started to happen towards I don't know, like the end of Bronzeville?
Well, I think when the freeways were started in the 50s, started construction and building, and a lot of your businesses closed up on Walnut Street. And some of them did relocate elsewhere, maybe more toward North Avenue, more toward Capitol. But that's what really broke up the community, is when the freeway and redevelopment came through here, and things beginning, some of the old businesses and things like that no longer existed. And people were getting older, of course, too. And they didn't have kids maybe there to pick up the business.
To pick up the reins.
And carry on.
A study by Dr. Michael Rosen, instructor at Milwaukee Area Technical College, found companies like A.O. Smith began hiring African American workers in 1942 in response to federal charges of discriminatory hiring practices and labor shortages created by the war.
Between 1945 and 1970, Milwaukee was a very strong unionized manufacturing town. And both of those points, that it had a high level of union density as well as a significant manufacturing base, were important. The manufacturing jobs were good paying jobs, and increasingly African Americans migrated from the South or from Chicago to Milwaukee to obtain employment in those areas. As a result, many African American families who came from rural poverty were able to obtain jobs, union jobs that paid family supporting wages, buy their own homes, and begin to integrate into the Milwaukee's middle class.
Black community itself was, it was good times. You didn't have the despair that you have now. Many of these industries offered middle-class lifestyles. You worked and you made a middle-class wage, which meant that many of the young people now who wound up going on to college and are doing some different things, well, that was made possible by many of their fathers and parents who worked in these factories, made enough money to send their kids on to college and do the things that they wanted to do. And also live in neighborhoods that were conducive to raising families.
Now fast forward 20 years to the 70s. Another process began taking the black community apart: industrial globalization. Just as before, the black community in Milwaukee was not prepared for this hit.
Milwaukee, after looking at 50 years of economic numbers, is an amazing story of globalization more than anything else.
John Schmid, journalist with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, did a special report in 2004 entitled "Hit by a Global Train." It stated the region's economy had been stunted and that job loss was worse than the Great Depression.
Employment was never greater anywhere. Milwaukee had the greatest concentration of jobs for African Americans in any major city. The statistics make that clear. So when deindustrialization began, and it came to a city where there was just an awful lot of metal bending, widget making. We're sitting here in an old automotive factory. Those were the jobs that got hit hardest and hit first. And the story of Milwaukee really is the force and pace of economic change hit this city harder than any others. And it was the working class, the laboring class, and specifically the African Americans who were on the front lines of globalization like no other city.
What do you get when the toolbox of the world seeks cheaper labor, eliminates opportunities, smashes dreams, and destroys a community? Poverty.
and you get the beginning of some despair and hopelessness.
Dr. Frank Wilson, an associate professor of sociology and urban studies at the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee, wrote, "Race, Class, and the Post-Industrial City." The book describes the Black experience in deindustrialization.
People don't have well-paying jobs. It's going to be tougher to have families. At the same time, not having well-paying jobs translates also in terms of the communities, in terms of the possibilities of home ownership, and also the possibilities that, people can expect to do better than each generation. I mean, that's part of the American dream. By the 90s, we start to see unprecedented, not only rates of unemployment, but also joblessness in Milwaukee. And comparing it with a number of other cities, the disparity in unemployment and joblessness between the African American and the white American community is one of the highest. But it begins with the fact that people do not have the same kind of economic means. Now, many people may work in the service sector. Many of these service jobs may not pay a fraction of what the factory jobs did. And many of these may not be full-time jobs. And we also have to ask the question, what are the benefits? And the benefit packages aren't commensurate with what we had in the factory jobs. So things have really gotten tighter. So where do people turn? Well, for some, while this is going on, you do have a middle class in Milwaukee, but the middle class in Milwaukee is relatively small compared to a number of cities. And looking at some of the demographic data, if you look at the extremely poor, the poor, and the near poor in Milwaukee among African Americans, they make up almost 2/3 of the community. So we're talking about a community that's really struggling economically, at least based on the official numbers. Also, if you look at the income, and in 2000, the income of the typical African American household and white household in Milwaukee, the ratio was less than half. We're talking about African Americans in Milwaukee making less than half of the typical white households. This is a pre-civil rights kind of phenomenon.
I'm a person who attribute a lot of our crime problems to people not having life-sustaining jobs. The underground economy that is flourishing in Milwaukee now and has been for 25 years or so. I had a choice when I was a young man, when I came to Milwaukee at age 16. I started work at A.O. Smith at 18. I could have chosen to live in it, work in the underground economy, or go find a job. Well, obviously I worked for 30 years at A.O. Smith, so I chose that economy, actual in the workplace. That's not an option today for a large portion of our population of our community.
Sheila Cochran, Secretary and Treasurer and Chief Operating Officer of the Milwaukee County Labor Council, knows firsthand how job loss affects families and the African American community.
It was those manufacturing jobs that really helped create that entrepreneurial spirit. In my family, I would say, in just quickly a little inventory of family members, a lot of them were in manufacturing. And that's where the benefits came from. That's where the push for going to college came from. That's where home ownership came from. That's where being more viable in the society came from. And it's also where I think a lot of creativity comes from. And being able to do things and being able to have a car, be a part of a greater community, being parts of all of the church organizations and activities that people were. It was what allowed people to grow. You take all that away, you also take all the other things away. So you begin to see a loss of home ownership. You begin to see that people no longer have a vehicle to get themselves from one place to another. You see families beginning to fall apart because they don't have that one good job in the household, or maybe even those two good jobs in the household that really everybody, was able to bridge and grow from. So I think in the African American community, especially in areas where the manufacturing facility was located right in the community where you worked, it was also a loss of a lot of neighborhoods, because neighborhoods and businesses and what have you sprung up around those.
The beginning of the 21st century saw Milwaukee's unemployment characterized by racial disparities. The gap in white and black unemployment was the highest in the nation, with black unemployment being 4 times higher than whites.
If you take away jobs that quickly from a community like this, and I'll point to this, we're in the old A.O. Smith factory. It at one time employed 8,000 workers. 1 of every 3 of them was an African American. Some swept scrap metal. A lot worked in metal foundries. It wasn't easy work, but you could do it without even a high school degree. Now there are no jobs there, and that's really emblematic of the story of Milwaukee. Those jobs disappeared, and with them, the income, the buying power. Look at the bungalows that surround that factory. Those were single-family and double-family houses that were occupied by working families. Working families quickly became unworking families. Income-producing families quickly became non-income producing families. So a whole society, a whole urban society, in a very short time frame, had to deal with a very rapid economic change. It was made harder, by the way, because the African Americans who worked in A.O. Smith or in Alice Chalmers or in the big flagship factories that were in this city had come up from the South. It was largely agricultural. You hear stories almost to a person of sharecropping existence, where education was not always the norm. The window of opportunity to switch from a labor-based, non-educational economy to a knowledge-based economy was very narrow. They had to make a transition much faster than other generations of workers who came to the city. The Polish came to the city 100 years before the African Americans. The Irish, too. They could find their footing, get their kids through school, get their kids through college, put down roots, create a future, have the American dream. The American dream was so quickly out of reach when the bottom rung jobs just disappeared.
Look at the area around what used to be A.O. Smith, which was Tower Automotive, which is now, the site for the city's, I think the city has one group over there. That used to have a lot more activity around it than it did now, and the community around it suffered. I mean, from the loss of the credit union, the union hall, the bars, the restaurants, all of the homes that were around there, everybody that owned a home in that area, the activity that sprang out of the employees just on a day-to-day operation going back and forth. Every single thing that our family used to do at some point in time revolved around activity at Tower Automotive. From something like churches selling chicken dinners to help, build buildings, to having relatives who worked there, who, gave kids gifts, who, lived in the community, had homes in the community, and did more than just share their paycheck. But they also shared, what they had learned and other things there. So if you multiply that by every one of the manufacturing facilities that we've lost, you have a huge hole in the African American community, especially when it comes to our general wealth and economy. It just is missing. And I think you'd find that with, out here It happened around Ellis Chalmers, Master Lock, any of them where you had a big loss.
From about the age of 14 to 18 years old, I worked in a drugstore. There was neighborhood grocery stores, not just little small, but mom and pop grocery stores, and they employed young people. 5 and dime stores. There was commerce around here. There were businesses. You name it, those businesses were inside this community, which meant young people did not have to want or long for jobs. I was raised always working because there was always a job available for me to work. Nowadays, if I had a dime for every time a young person asked me if I could help them find a job, I'd be a wealthy man. They don't exist anymore.
The current strategy that's being adopted in Milwaukee doesn't really aim at creating jobs per se.
Dr. Mark Levine, University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee Center for Economic Development, has published a paper entitled The Crisis of Black Male Joblessness in Milwaukee: Trends, Explanations, and Policy Options. It calls attention to Milwaukee's lag in generating employment in the African American community compared to other Northeast and Midwest cities.
It doesn't use the powers of government, for example, that could actually stimulate the economy and create jobs through things like public investment, public works projects, infrastructure projects, and the like. Milwaukee's been in an economic stagnation for over 20 years. The net jobs that have been created in Milwaukee since 1980 have all been created in the suburban areas. Actually, the city of Milwaukee has lost about 20% of its employment base, much more of that, almost 60% since the 1960s of its industrial base. So we're hemorrhaging industrial jobs in the city, we're hemorrhaging jobs generally in the city, and there doesn't seem to be a strategy for how you actually go about and create those jobs.
And I had a conversation with someone one time that asked me about smokestacks in downtown Milwaukee, and I said I didn't really have a problem with smokestacks in as much as I had a problem with the lack of smokestacks, because I think technologies will get you to get cleaner air, which we would hope for, but those smokestacks missing meant that you didn't even get that opportunity.
Some of them just, their living, standard of living has really plummeted. People who were used to working and earning $15 to $20 an hour or more, some of them for 28 years, some for 29 years, and did not get the 30 to retire, and in their minds they lost everything. So some of them had to take low-wage jobs, and some are angry. Some of my co-workers, former co-workers, but then there's that population that's doing very well. Some are able to go on and make new lives for themselves.
Unlike Cleveland, Cincinnati, Kansas City, Pittsburgh, areas that were big in industry years ago, those cities have made the change, realized that they had to redefine what they were going to be, and move forward with that. Milwaukee still apparently has not made that determination on what they're going to do or what we're going to be defined by. And that really, I think, has hurt us right now, especially in the African American community, with all the crime that goes on, with 6 out of every 10 African American males unemployed. That's unconscionable. All that does is breed the conditions that we have now in our neighborhoods. People want to work. They certainly do want to work, but the work now, unlike then, where I could come out of high school with a high school diploma and work in a place like this and earn a middle-class lifestyle and send my children to college and buy a home, that does not exist anymore. Today, people are going to have secondary education, and that is, in my opinion, one of the biggest problems that we have today because of what's going on in the educational system in MPS, what they're faced with, and trying to employ people who come out, and many of them who drop out of school.
But I'm interested in knowing if you all know why we have poverty. What do you think? Okay, well, could you share that with us? Because I don't know if you guys are paying as close attention to this community as we do, because we drive through.
Milwaukee is working to figure out how to handle this economic downturn in the African American community. Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett has traveled the world gathering information on how to solve the jobless situation in Milwaukee's black community. Workshops like this one, held at the Center Street Library in Milwaukee, gave the community the opportunity to have their say.
the reality is for people, and look at the companies, people that would go to start to work at A.O. Smith or Evinrude or the breweries when they were 18, 19, or 20 years old and worked there for many years. The 18, 19, and 20-year-olds in Milwaukee do not have those same opportunities that people had 30 or 40 years ago. The point that I have been making as much as I can in this community is that I honestly believe that there is no time in the history of this city where education is more important than it is today. And the reason that I say that is because many of these jobs that were the great blue-collar jobs that we had in this community, they're gone. They're gone. And are there new jobs to replace them? Yes. I talk to a lot of employers and I talk to a lot of people in the community. And I'll talk to many, many employers who tell me that their frustration is that they cannot find a workforce to do the jobs that they have available. And there was a day that just sort of crystallized this for me, because what happened that day was I attended an economic development summit. Basically, it was a Saturday morning community brainstorming, talking to a lot of young people who were frustrated and a lot of not so young people about not having work and the frustrations of not having work. Later that day, by pure coincidence, I was on the northwest side and toured a factory up there and had the plant manager say, our biggest frustration is we've got jobs and we can't find people to fill them. Same day, same city, ships passing in the night. So looking at this community and looking 10 years out where we're going to have massive retirements because the baby boomers are going to retire, what we need to do is to come up with an action plan to get our young people trained, to get people who don't have the skills so that they can have the skills so they don't have to live in poverty.
What I'm more interested is accountability. There are people who are filtering money to companies that are right in the inner city, and they know that some of their people are going to be baby boomers. They know that since they've profited and they've had revenues, that it's time now to create, maybe through just a percentage of that money that they get, an operation that addresses that need to come, because we know that needs to come. Secondly, academically, we have a curriculum that doesn't even address industrial, let alone beyond. You know, to pursue a dream, there's never even opportunity in our classrooms to go over things like that. But you instill in the youth knowledge that they can't even use.
Right.
And then you're frustrated when they turn around and rebel.
Milwaukee has been using a three-pronged strategy: job training, minority entrepreneurship, and regionalism to create jobs. Job training may not be an effective strategy because training prepares workers for a job that may not exist. It doesn't create jobs. For example, in 2005 in Milwaukee, there were 88,000 more people looking for work than there were jobs. And minority entrepreneurship may not be very effective either.
Minority entrepreneurship, which is a very important thing to do in the community to diversify our corporate leadership, to diversify our business structure, is unfortunately also not a very effective job strategy because minority-owned firms tend to be very small and they tend to be very volatile in the sense of going up and down with regard to the business cycle and the market. And so a very small number of individuals are actually employed in minority-owned firms, not only in Milwaukee, but even in places like Atlanta, which have very successful minority entrepreneurship programs. So even if we really succeeded, which I hope we'll do, in doubling or even tripling the number of minority-owned firms in Milwaukee, that still wouldn't make a big impact in the overall rate of black joblessness, for example, in the city, because there just simply aren't enough jobs being created there.
The regionalism piece could work if Milwaukee could find a way to link up the suburban economy to the city economy, because the suburbs are where jobs are being created.
But the problem with regionalism today in Milwaukee is that nobody's really talking about how to make those linkages, either through transportation, through affordable housing, through anti-discrimination efforts in the suburbs to open up suburban housing to persons of color. And so regionalism that's being pursued in Milwaukee really isn't the kind of regionalism that we really need to pursue to address the jobs crisis. One area that we've suggested in this report that would be very useful would be investing in something like a regional light rail system. Milwaukee is one of the few large cities in the country that doesn't have one. There are a lot of reasons I think that's the case. I think none of them hold much water. But the bottom line is if we invested in a regional light rail system, that would create a lot of jobs in the construction phase, and it would create a lot of jobs in knitting together the regional economy and making it easier for jobless in the central city to get to jobs in suburban areas.
The study says that residents' preference programs should be expanded for public projects. The preference programs target the hiring for these projects to those in neighborhoods where the unemployment rate is the highest. The city, as well as the region, could attach some financial incentives to developers, thus creating jobs.
It's how do we bring the region together and open up the suburbs so that the jobless in the central city can get access to jobs in the suburbs, can get access to living in the suburbs. Milwaukee has by far the lowest rate of black suburbanization of any metro area in the northeastern Midwest historically industrial area. Only 8% of black workers in Milwaukee live in the suburbs, compared to even someplace like Detroit, which is a pretty segregated city, but there is some black suburbanization there, and so 35% of the region's black labor force actually lives in the suburbs, and that's Detroit, so it's 4 times greater than Milwaukee. So we think the suburbs need to be opened up a little bit as well.
Crazy. But bottom line, what's needed is jobs.
New jobs, and actually a good mix of jobs that we've had in the past. Good manufacturing jobs. Obviously, they're going to be a different type of manufacturing job than we may have experienced in the past. We're going to have a good mix in that service economy that we're growing so that people can really advance and have some careers out of it. And I also think that it's going to continue to have, and we have a good, I would say, mix of corporate jobs right now. Some of those are going to have to really, I think, become more diverse, not only in the personnel that they have, but also the types of jobs that they are, so that people can aspire and truly get through those glass ceilings or whatever ceiling you might think it is.
At one point, with a high school diploma, you could get a good job and take care of your family, have promotions, and be pretty comfortable with your standard of living. Today, technical schools like Milwaukee Area Technical College are out in the community, letting people know further training is needed to be part of the future job market.
If you don't have the ability or the skill set to get meaningful employment, sometimes you have to do things that are inappropriate, and I think we all are concerned with the growing numbers of individuals, particularly African American males, that are incarcerated. So what we have to do is motivate our young people, as well as individuals that are displaced, that learning is lifelong. No, I think we live in 2 worlds. There's the fast-paced world, and then there's the slow-paced world. And those that work in the fast-paced worlds are those that are committed to learning the technology that's driven by our digital revolution. And by mastering those technologies, there are always opportunities for employment. And then there's that slow-paced world that many find themselves falling further and further behind, who have not taken the time to learn the new technologies, who end up in low-paying jobs, and then from low-paying jobs there's generally unemployment, or in some cases more layoff and less opportunity. So we've got to motivate our workforce that the opportunities are there for individuals who want to get involved in the technologies and want to be a part of the changes that make things happen in our workforce.
We must emphasize in the 21st century that a very rigorous education that involves mathematics, science, reading, writing, as well as computer skills is accessible to all. And we're talking about the kind of education usually that would have been available only to college prep or honor students. In other words, you cannot have some people being prepared for the informational global age and some not. We also have to get across the message that education is not a guarantee, but to not have an education is a guarantee for failure and destruction. I remember Marvin Collins once saying, "Learn or die." And this message has to get across.
Dr. Frank Wilson also said that part of the economic development must include equality. Our political leaders and citizens must speak out to make sure there's a fair share in respect to contracts, public jobs, and any other kind of jobs.
It seems to be the norm that there's a certain kind of acceptance of a high degree of racial inequality and segregation in Milwaukee. This is to be taken quietly. We're not supposed to speak out about it. And yet, it's going to reproduce itself unless the cycle is broken.
Dr. Wilson said young people should look to entrepreneurship, find niche economies where they can be players. One of those niche economies is the business of daycare, and Christina Mitchell is one of those players. She graduated from high school at the age of 17, and at 18 wondered what to do with herself. A friend suggested she try childcare, since she loves children and had none of her own. So at the age of 20, she began her business, Christina Childcare and Development.
You don't want to go to sleep, Tig? You want to go to sleep? Here's my infant spoon. I can keep 8 infants at one time, and then this here is my 1-year-old side.
Where did you start out at?
I started out at my house as a family center, and I've grown to this group center. I've purchased a building.
How long did that process take for you to go from at home to this?
Okay, well, you start off with certification, and then you can grow to license, and then you can expand to the group. But in the house, I was only able to keep 8 children at one time, and versus this place, you can keep 50 children at one time. And I have 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
So I heard there's an interesting story behind how you walked into Legacy Bank, how you hooked up with Margaret.
Yes.
What happened there?
What I did was I was really trying to expand my business, my family center. And I went into the bank and I heard about Legacy Bank and how they help black minorities get the loans that they need if you were at a risk or not.
And Margaret is?
She's the president of the
Legacy?
bank. She told me that that she felt my business had potential, and I had came in and I had my money, and like I said, I was around looking for buildings all in the area and everything to expand, and I just went into there, and with my money I had some money wrapped in a handkerchief that I had saved, and I also had an account, but I had took all the money out of the account to take over to Legacy Bank, because that's where I was going to start my banking and everything with, because they were going to help me to get the loan to succeed in what I'm doing now.
So you went into the bank with a handkerchief full of money?
Yes, I did.
Margaret Henningsen took Christina under her wings and guided her through to make the business happen. The loan went through and she purchased the building, but
the building was real raggedy and it needed a lot of upgrading for the state. So I had to go back additional to the Legacy Bank and ask them for another loan to make the fixtures of the place and get it up to code so that I can open. Because in the process of all this, the upstairs has apartment units, so that was also helping me to make my payments and everything. But
so you leased out the upstairs, or you rented out the upstairs? Yes, I rent out the apartments
to help me to pay the mortgage and everything.
When did you decide? When did you open the doors? What was the date?
Well, see, I had purchased the building in February of 2003, but it was like I had a lot of contractors in and out, and just architects, and I really didn't have the money at the time, and so that it was just a step I had to pay the architects in a timely manner, get all the supplies and pay the contractors, also too. So it took me 3 years to really get the building, but I still had my current house, you were still generate money and income also. Okay. So to help me to better this place. And we provide transportation, we provide nutritious meals, and we provide love and care.
Christina Mitchell continues to grow her business. Her next venture, which is in the works, is assisted living for the elderly.
Do a lot more with working with elderlies and children. I want to operate a group home for assistant living for elderlies. And I was trying to help the teenagers a little bit, but it's like really I don't have no one like my aldermans, and they feel they did a lot for the teenagers, which I don't feel they did enough, you know, and they don't want them in their community, in their area. So I've been having a hard time with that. So I just been moving on to what's, you know, that's like easier for me to do, and not go through so much hassle with the people who's basically controlling and running things. I plan to do a pantry for my community. I mean, I do a lot of things for my community too, and also my clients and my staff. I try to do as best as I can with giving back. I mean, I'm grateful that I'm blessed to have this business, and I try to do as much as I can. Just like now, if someone called looking for a pantry, that the pantry's down the street and it's not open and they haven't found it, they can come down here and we fully stocked in the kitchen, and we'll make them bags and everything like that too. Well, I just want to, you know, reach out to the community and help as best as I can. Especially the kids, because teenagers, you know, nobody is really, you know, for them. You know, they feel they don't got so grown, and you know, ain't nobody teaching them responsibilities as far as, you know, what they need to do to, you know, make it in the real world.
Other job areas we need to pay attention to are the construction jobs and the apprenticeships.
And the other jobs, I think that, for instance, in the service sectors, I think people see the service sector as more dead-end jobs, when in fact a lot of those service sector jobs might lead you into more career-oriented paths. So where you might, I think in the vernacular, the back of the house jobs that people don't see, and the front house jobs, and I think typically you would see those in hotels and restaurants, that type of thing, where you have good jobs that are there, but they need to pay a very good wage. They need to pay wages that people can really live off of. So we'd like to see a better mix of that, I think. And then even in some of the jobs where people are doing services that we would consider maybe the lower skill type service jobs, those jobs have a certain amount of I think dignity to them that is not respected, and it should be respected. And I also think that people need to be able to have those jobs pay a little more than they're actually paying now, so that you can, you know, move yourself through those ranks. When it comes to manufacturing, we have to be able to react, I think, a lot quicker than we are now to the needs of those manufacturing corporations. And a lot of that is not necessarily, I think, on individuals, in as much it might even be to some degree the fault of the manufacturers, because they've had proprietary information. You know, they're very competitive, and not every industry is going to provide you with what you need. And I think right now we're seeing that in welding, because of all of the needs in the welding industry. Well, for all too long, we have depleted the manufacturing jobs where you may have had welders come out of and really, you know, get to those jobs. Now that you really need them, they may not be there for you, or they're in other industries that, you know, where welding something simple has now become a little more complex, and maybe they've gone on to a different type of job. So it's all those types of things. And then we also have to develop high-tech jobs. The real jobs, like, and I think the one that I used to have would have been considered one of those, but I think that they're not known. And because they're not known, I think that people don't imagine them. And when you can't imagine something, you can't imagine a person having a career in those fields. So those are things that I think we have to have. So it's got to be a good mix. And, you know, if you really think about it, any kind of thing that you purchase or any kind of thing that is done, it generated from somewhere. So you've got to have the ability to mix all those things to have a good, viable economy. You can't have one or the other. You got to have a good mix, and that gives you a solid economy. I think we have the ability in this region as well as the state to do that, because I think a lot of people have been talking about it. It gets a lot of attention. But there's also a workforce here, and especially in Milwaukee, that is ready and able to go to work. They just may not have the means to get to it. I think that the Black community needs to really not just invest in what they assume, but I think there needs to be a concerted effort around where markets are and where people are really looking for work. They need to have a link, not to just, not just to go into training blindly, but to have a link from what they may train for and what the need really is. For instance, when I was growing up, it was always said, you need to go to college, you need to go to college, you need to go to college. And what I wanted to go to college for, I didn't think would constitute a career, not that I could make money off of. And so I didn't go, which extraordinarily disappointed my father, but I ended up, through various tracks, into a factory. Well, the type of factory that I went into, especially in the year I went in, doesn't exist anymore. So it's really hard now to go in and get those entry-level jobs. And there needs to be a path that people can take the skills that they have and go into places. And that's not always going to be just something that the Black community would have to do. You can't wait for people to offer you things. And I'm not suggesting that everyone does, but I am saying that you really have to be, I think, very aggressive in going after what you really want.
Former Mayor of Milwaukee, John Norquist, says Milwaukee has a lot going for it being on Lake Michigan. It has a lot of great traditions and cultures and has a great future. He said Milwaukee shouldn't focus so much on its problems. It should focus on its assets.
The city itself, it's beautiful. It has a lot of great traditions and culture. It has economic traditions. It has industries that I think may come back strong, like the machining industry. It's really the highest concentration of tool machining in the country is in Milwaukee, and it's becoming more relevant now that computerization is now involved in manufacturing, and you have schools like Milwaukee School of Engineering, which are particularly focused on manufacturing. So if you don't focus too much on subsidizing things and instead on the basic ingredients of the economy, I think Milwaukee has a lot of ingredients that will emerge on its own.
I see for the future of Milwaukee as a destination is the image changing. And certainly the product that has been developed here, whether it's the addition to the Art Museum, the Santiago Calatrava edition, to the Discovery World, to projects that like Bronzeville, those type of new products that are happening here are certainly going to help differentiate ourselves from the competition. So that's what's going to be key to our success, is differentiating ourselves from the others out there. And I think one of the other things that we've got to show, and I think business has to show, is what's here in the way of diverse product, whether it's diverse cultures, whether it's diversity in the workforce. We have got to continue to make that a priority in order to help Milwaukee grow.
I've said for the longest that I think one of the worst things that ever happened was when they took the wood shop, metal shop, mechanical drawing out of the public schools. When I was in high school, granted that was a long time ago, it was mandatory that you had those types of electives before you could even graduate, especially boys. You had to have metal shop, wood shop, mechanical drawing, and that's kind of what kind of led me into the factory. I enjoyed doing those kind of things with my hands. I wasn't a bad student. I could have went on to college and done some other things, but I enjoyed doing the thing with my hands. They need to bring more of that back and expose young people to that, because the need continues to be there. It's never going to change. You're always going to need people in those trades. So that's what I would say. Increase the amount of technical educations that we have in our public school system.
If you travel around Milwaukee's inner city, barbershops, restaurants, parking lots, you'll find senior citizens gathered reminiscing about the good old days. A time when jobs at the factories were plentiful. A time when sending your kid to school for a better life was not a strain. Today, these same people gather and talk of just making it day to day. These are the people who work 20 and 30 years at factories, making middle-class wages while making the corporations who own them rich. When the global economy hit, corporate America moved on, leaving in its wake deserted factories, unemployed workers, and a decimated community. This special is to let those people who worked at those factories, Laddish, Alice Chalmers, American Motors, A.O. Smith Tower, and numerous others, who took their hard-earned money and built a middle-class African-American community. Your work didn't go unnoticed. Today, we are once again trying to recreate a livable community by creating strategies to connect people to jobs and ways to create jobs in this new global workplace. We hope our community leaders are up to the challenge.
It's supposed to be our future. And that's why it bothers me, because we got all excited and we thought that this was going to be it. And this $100 million that you see before you, that's 4 years. 4 years. And that it ended like that was the most tragic part, that it ended so soon. It was a great time. I don't want to leave anybody to believe that it wasn't. I had a tremendous time. If I had, and I've always said it, if I had to be locked into a dead-end job, this is one of the best dead-end jobs to be locked into.
Starting all over, I know it's gonna be rough. So rough, baby. You find yourself missing them kisses and a hug.